All right, so we'll start with this question, and I'm starting with this question today, although usually we don't have any particular order, but since Chanukah is coming next week, as you all know, in exactly a week from tonight, in fact, will be the first night of Chanukah. So I want to start with a question that relates to Chanukah. And the question is as follows. Dear Rabbi, as we prepare for Chanukah next week, can you share with us some of the laws and ideas of Chanukah? So first, I want to point you to the Wednesday class that we had. It's on YouTube already, the Happiness Hour class, in which we really delved into the topic of Chanukah. But if I had to very briefly condense some of the big ideas of Chanukah and then some of the laws, but the idea of Chanukah is that the human spirit of goodness can prevail over evil. That's really the idea of Chanukah, that the soul is more powerful than the body, that goodness eventually prevails, and that the ambassadors of the divine are are always triumphant. Now, that's really the message of Chanukah. Now, I of course draw this message from the two miracles of Chanukah. There is the miracle of the military victory of the Maccabees over the Greeks, as we all know, in the year 164 BCE, after 3 years of a very difficult war. The Maccabees overcame the mighty Greeks, although they were much fewer, although they were weaker, at least physically weaker, and although the Jews that the Jewish nation that they lived in was divided, and many of them did not agree with them, the Maccabees were able to truly overcome the Greeks, both their genius of strategy, of war strategy, but also, of course, with God's help. And that eventually led them to rededicate the temple that was filthy with idol worship, filthy with pigs, filthy with prostitutes. The Greeks did terrible things to the Jewish people just to humiliate them, including, of course, defile their Jerusalem temple. So after 3 years, they rededicated this temple, and then came about the second miracle. I know you all know it, but since you asked, I'm going to repeat it. And that is that when they wanted to rededicate the temple, they were looking for a pure cruse of olive oil. There were many cruises of olive oil, but all of them were defiled. All of them were open and cracked by the Romans. There was only one that was eventually found that was completely pure and sealed. That cruse of olive oil was supposed to last, to kindle the menorah, and that light was supposed to last for only 1 day. And as we know, it lasted for 8 days, which is a great miracle. And therefore, we also have 8 days of Chanukah, and we light the Chanukah each and every day of Chanukah. Now, in what both miracles have in common is that, again, that spirit of goodness, that soul eventually overcame the physicalities of the world and even the evil of the world, whether it's the evil of the Greeks or the spiritual evil of the darkness of that period. The menorah, eventually, that light eventually expelled that darkness, and in the most miraculous way. Now, why am I saying this? I think that's because, in many ways, we face challenges too, just as the Maccabees did. In many ways, we face evil, just as the Maccabees did. Maybe they don't come in such clear forms like they came in their times, when it was clear that it was the Greeks and their decrees that was evil, but they come in all sorts of shades. But still, we face challenges, we face hardships, and yes, we face evil in this world. And sometimes those challenges are so overwhelming that we naturally tend to say to ourselves, well, let's give up, let's quit. And here comes Judah the Maccabee and tells us, no, believe in yourself, believe in the power of your soul, believe in its ability to conquer even the greatest evil, and follow it, pursue its calling, and I promise you, you will win too. And that's what the Maccabees did. That's what this miracle of the light does. And that's what we draw from Chanukah. I quoted on Wednesday, Mendel Futerfas, who was a Hasidic Jew that I had the privilege of meeting, truly a heroic man who grew up without a father because his father died when his mother was still pregnant with him. His name was Menachem Mendel, Ben Menachem Mendel. He was named after his father. He grew up in communist Russia in which he was thrown into the gulag for 20 years just for practicing Judaism. By the way, he had 6 children, not by the way, he had 6 children, all of them died in his lifetime. And this man never lost his resolve. And one of his famous quotes was that if you've lost money, then you really haven't lost anything, because money comes, money goes. If you've lost your health, you've lost something, because you're not the same person as you were before. But if you've lost your resolve, you've lost everything. This was a man who embodied this quote. And again, I think that's the message of Chanukah. That's the big idea of Chanukah. Some of the laws, as mentioned, the law, the mitzvah of Chanukah is to light the Chanukiah each and every night. We have to place it by the window or by the entrance of our home. Of course, there are many customs like eating latkes, oily foods, to represent the oil miracle of Chanukah, and playing the dreidel to represent the game that the Jews were playing as they tried to hide from the Greeks, that they were actually learning. But when the Greeks came to spy on them, they immediately put those books away and took out the dreidel to show that they really weren't learning, so that they wouldn't get in trouble. So we play the dreidel too. And the most important custom of Chanukah is to commit ourselves to our souls, to asking the question really of how can we ensure that it finds expression, that that soul, that spirit, that resilience that we're speaking about finds expression consistently each and every day of our lives. And of course, ensuring also that soul shines, not just in our lives, but also in other people's lives. That's why we place the Chanukah again towards the public, because the duty is not just to take care of the light within, but it's also to take care of the light without, and to ensure that when we face darkness in the world, then we are there as the ambassadors of the divine to expel it. Anyway, that's really Chanukah on one foot. And again, I encourage you to go to our class that's been recorded on Wednesday. And there we really delved into this topic of Chanukah.
Rabbi?
Yes, Joy.
What you're talking, first of all, thank you for the class yesterday. It was extraordinary.
Thank you.
And with what you're saying tonight, a friend of mine who has been in our classes before, Rita, she lives in LA, but her grandson's name is Maccabee. And I kept thinking about him yesterday, and he is an extraordinary young man. And I told her about your class, but is there something that you can think of? He is that kind of a kid raised in a very wonderful Jewish home, and his name is Maccabee. Is there something? I just spoke with her before our class tonight. And
so let's delve into that name a little bit, because still it's in the context of Chanukah. So Maccabee, where did that name come from? And the Talmud, well, some people say that it means a hammer, and it represents the power of their fist, and how they were victorious, not just spiritually, but also physically over the Greeks. But the Talmud also points out that the word Maccabee really stands for 4 Hebrew words that come from a verse that we say each and every day in our prayer, a verse that was sung by the Jewish people during the splitting of the Red Sea. And that verse is Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem, which means, who is like you among the gods, our Lord. You're the greatest. And the Maccabees really carry that flag very proudly. We are, again, the ambassadors of the divine. And therefore, they were called the Maccabees. If you want to go a little bit deeper into this, the Talmud also says, as a very, very powerful twist on this verse. The verse says, Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem, which means, who is like you? Elim means gods, in plural. Who is like you among the gods? Our Lord. These gods, these fake gods, are nothing compared to you, right? That's really the meaning of the verse. But the Talmud has a twist on it and says, Al tikri ba'elim ela ba'ilemim. Do not read among the gods, but read among the mute ones, mute, saying that who is like you among the mute ones? God. Now, what does this mean? So what it means is that when others, there's 2 interpretations to this. The second one is really the most powerful. The first one means simply that when faced with the abyss or despair, then people become mute. They don't know what to do. And then God comes and shows that he's really the one in control. Who is like you among the mute ones? When everyone else is mute, God, you show your real power. But there's a different interpretation. And in a way, that's what the Maccabees embody too. And that is, we say to God in a way very cruelly, we say to God, God, who is like you among the mute ones? You too. You're the mutest of all. There are mute people who fall into despair, but sometimes we find ourselves in such despair that we hear you being mute. You too are silent. Where are you, God? Wake up. And by the way, that's a very Jewish approach, because we believe in protesting God, in saying, God, this is not right. Evil is happening. You can't be mute here. And in a way, it's turning this verse into a cry of protest. Now, in a way, this embodied the Maccabees, because the Maccabees faced this evil. The Greeks came and decreed the most vicious decrees against the Jewish people, trying to truly murder their soul. And the Maccabees said, God, where are you? And come, let's partner together. Let's fight this evil. And God said, fine, you know what? I will. You do your job and I'll do my job. And that's how eventually the Maccabees were overcome. But in a way, it's also a cry of protest, what their name represents. And also to stand for good when we think that even God is silent. Yes, Hannah.
We couldn't go on without talking about the Maccabean Games. Israel has these games all over the world every year. It's in a different country. I think last year it was in Mexico, and it's called the Maccabi Games, which is like the Olympics, but for Jewish people.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
No, I know, but
I don't know if it's a good representation of the Maccabees. We would have to ask the Maccabees themselves.
But they're dead. They're not alive.
I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, it's a good thing. I'm not, God forbid, bashing it, but I would love the Maccabee Games to represent the Maccabees fully. And what I mean by that is that I think they ought to represent not just the physical might, but also the spiritual might. Yeah. And I would love the Maccabee Games to be a little more spiritual than they are today. And I'm not saying this now to God forbid, bash the Maccabees and to the Maccabee Games. And by the way, I've said this to people who are leaders in that organization too. But I think that will be a more wholesome representation of the Maccabees themselves. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi, because this boy is like that. And I want him to hear this because he doesn't know this interpretation.
Okay, very good. Very good. Excellent. Good. Well, I'm happy I was able to share it. Thank you. All right, next question. Okay, dear Rabbi, please feel free not to answer this question during our Q&A. I recognize that this question is deeply personal, and therefore you don't have to address it at all. But I thought I would try. Can you tell us what, in your eyes, is the role of a rabbi? Not so personal. First of all, Rabbi Eisen is among us, and I'm sure he can answer this question much better than I can. But
I'm muted.
Who is like you among the muted ones? But what is the role of a rabbi? Look, I'll give you two answers. First of all, the answer I received from my own rabbi, the rabbi of rabbis, Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz of blessed memory. When I received my smicha, my rabbinic ordination, I came with him with the diploma. I came to him with the diploma and I said to him, Rabbi, what does this represent? What does this mean? And I've shared this before. Rabbi Steinsaltz answered, well, what it means now that you're a rabbi is that people will come to you with questions, and your role is to identify the question behind the question. Because very often the question is just an excuse for what they really want to convey, but they may be too embarrassed to convey what they feel deep inside. So you have to identify the person behind the question behind the question. And in a way, that's the role of a rabbi, to be able to truly connect to everyone individually, but to their core, to their entire being, to their feelings, to their sensations. That's what we have to connect to. And in a way, it's also synonymous with what Rashi tells us about the job description that God gave Moses when he was looking for a successor. And God said, Ish sheruach Elokim bo, that it should be a man with the Spirit of God in him. What does the Spirit of God mean? And Rashi again immediately points out, the form of his commentary, that a person that person that can sense the spirit in each and every human being. It's not just answering the externalities of the person, but it's really answering the spirit within the person. That's what a rabbi tries to do. But I'll give you another answer, which is deeply connected, of course, to this one. And I don't know why, but the story comes to mind. But in 1973, January 7th, 1973, the president of Israel then was Zalman Shazar, found himself in New York City, and he decided to go and visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory. By the way, this visit made headlines in Israel, some very negative ones, because people said, how dare the president lowers himself to go and visit a rabbi? He's the president of the state of Israel. The rabbi should come and visit him. But whatever. Zalman Shazar came from a Chabad family, in fact, from a very Hasidic family, and he felt that he was a Chassid visiting his Rebbe. Now, this is on video. When he came to the Rebbe's headquarters, to the 770 headquarters, some of you may be familiar with it, he had to climb the stairs towards the entrance and then walk all the way to the door of the entrance where the Rebbe was waiting for him. The problem was that that day was a bitter cold day. You could see on the video that it was snowing, snow was amassed. And when Shazar eventually reaches the Rebbe, he tells the Rebbe, this is, the weather is so cold. There is no place in Israel that is as cold as this weather. And the Rebbe, almost without hesitation, it's just so beautiful, and without skipping a beat, he tells Shazar, that's why we have a soul, to warm us from within. Mm-hmm. And it was a nice, humorous way of responding to his comment, but it was also of course, a very profound comment. Mm-hmm. And what the Rebbe was saying is that in you, you have a soul. In me, I have a soul. And when we face the coldness of life, then we have to ignite that soul to warm us. In a way, I think that's the task of a rabbi, to first of all, open people's eyes to the idea that they have a soul. Some people are not even aware of it. And secondly, to also commit people to their soul and to the calling of their soul. Everyone is unique, and that's why it's important to relate to everyone individually, as we spoke about, to understand the question behind the question, but also to guide the person towards the actualization of the calling of the soul, so that he can warm himself, and by warming himself, he'll be warming also the coldness of the world. So I think that's the essence of the role of a rabbi, to answer your question. And of course, Rabbi Eisen, I'm sure, has a better answer than me, so feel free to share it too. But you're on mute. Mika mocha ba'ilmi mashem. Okay, fine. Next question. So this is an interesting one. So, dear Rabbi, there's something I don't understand about religious Jews. It looks like Jewish couples who are religious don't show affection to each other in public, like holding hands or kissing in public. But I think that this teaches children that affection and romance is bad. How will they have successful marriages if they don't see affectionate parents? So, just a side comment. I'll relate to the question, I promise you. But I don't believe in religious Jews. I don't believe that Judaism is a religion. Going back to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there was once a woman who came to the Rebbe who was, at least apparently secular. And the Rebbe blessed her that she should have a lot of Yiddish and Hasidic nachas from her children, which means Jewish and Hasidic nachas from her children, satisfaction. And the woman was saying to the Rebbe, you have the wrong client here. I'm not frum. I'm not frum. That's the word she used. In other words, I'm not religious. And the Rebbe responded, no one knows who's frum and who's not. Some people, they may not be religious, but they respect their parents, and they conduct their businesses honestly, and they never gossip. These are mitzvahs too. And so they may not be religious. So religion has a very bad connotation, but beyond that, Judaism is being a part of a family. If you're not religious, you don't call yourself religious, you're still Jewish. So we don't believe that Judaism is a religion, but in any case, but I understand what you mean. Religious Jews, in other words, maybe the observant Jews don't show affection to each other in public, to their spouses. And you're saying that you think it teaches, it might give the wrong message to our children, because if they don't see affection, then they won't have affectionate marriages themselves. Fine. So I'm going to say two things. Number one, I disagree with the premise that affection means touching. I think there's so much more affection when spouses speak nicely to each other with respect. Mm-hmm. I think affection also means the ability to be kind and sensitive to one another. Yes, the expression of affection sometimes comes through physical touching. But I think that you can teach affection to your children by being affectionate in the ways of respect, in the ways of sensitivity, in the ways of kindness, in the ways of devotion, in the ways of dedication, the ways of selflessness. There is so much that is not physical that affection stands for. In fact, most of the idea of affection is not physical. So I disagree with that premise, number one. And I think that if people show that real affection to one another, then their children will also learn real affection. That's number one. Number two, I'll share a story. A short story about a woman shared with me the story that she came from an observant family. And she remembers that, it's an interesting story, but she remembers that she was once driving her, I think her father or mother, one of her parents was carpooling them to school. She must have been 9 or 10 years old. And then they stopped by a traffic light, and right by the traffic light, there was a couple that was kissing each other, French kissing each other, and displaying all the quote unquote affection that one can see. And the kids immediately said, some of the siblings immediately said to the parent, I think it was the mother, "Oh, this is disgusting." And the mother immediately corrected them and said, "It's not disgusting. It's just in the wrong place." And I think that the mother then really used that teachable moment in the most powerful way one can use a teachable moment like this. She was telling them, no, it's not. There's nothing wrong expressing physical affection. In fact, that's part and parcel of affection, indeed. But there's a place for everything. That physical connection is an intimate connection. And that intimate connection does not belong in public. In fact, the more you truly love, the more you'll feel that you don't need to show it in public. It exists so intimately, so profoundly, that it doesn't need any reassurances that you're doing the right thing by exposing it to the public. Warren Buffett, I think, still lives in his 1974 home. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. But he doesn't feel like he has to flaunt his wealth because he's wealthy enough that he doesn't have to flaunt his wealth. I think when you are truly, truly connected to something, you don't have to flaunt it. You don't have to show it in public. If you truly love, you won't feel the need to show it in public, especially that it could give the wrong message to some people, a message of objectizing, that's the way I call it, your love, instead of subjectizing your love. It becomes an object instead of a subject, a soul. It becomes a body rather than a soul. So it's not disgusting, but it's just in the wrong place. And there's a time and place for everything. And I think that's the message that we can get from quote unquote religious Jews not showing affection in public, or at least physical affection, because as we said, real affection is so much more than the physical aspect of it. Okay, next question. Okay, dear Rabbi Allouche, what if someone asks you about a doctor they want to see, but you had a very bad experience with that doctor? What do you tell them? So I suppose that the question comes from the perspective of speaking Lashon Hara, that you don't want to gossip about someone else, justifiably, right? Gossip is one of, is a terrible thing. But what if it is a doctor that you had a bad experience with, and you want to warn someone that's going to that same doctor, saying that, to tell them that maybe you should find yourself a different doctor, and you'll inevitably have to speak badly about this doctor? Well, there are clear guidelines. There are times in which lashon hara, gossiping, is allowed, and this fits into one of the categories. If this person is going to be treated by this doctor, and you've had a bad experience being treated by this doctor. If it's a matter of treatment, of course, your life, the virtue of life, comes first in Judaism before anything. And therefore, in order to protect someone else's life, one is allowed to transgress this prohibition of gossiping, because again, we hold life at a much higher level. So that's one exception. You're also allowed to gossip in other instances, if it's to save someone from a bad marriage. If someone is being matched to a girl or to a boy, say, and you know something about that boy that very few people know. Say you know that this boy suffers from a disease, but he's hiding it. Are you allowed to go and tell the girl that's being matched with him that this man has a disease? You'll be gossiping. But the answer is yes, because again, marriage is at a higher level than and of course peace in the home is at a higher level than gossiping. Now, going to share with the world that this man has a disease, that's gossiping. But if it's going to actively protect the peace in the home and marriages, then again, you're allowed to transgress this prohibition. So there are times, again, as we can see, that gossiping is allowed. If it's coming to protect someone's life, if it's coming to protect someone's marriage, if it's going to protect someone's business, someone's finances. If, for example, I was cheated by a merchant in town, am I allowed to tell someone, don't go to that merchant? Again, yes, because I'll be saving his money, and I'll be ensuring that he's not hurt. So to protect someone's financial harm, I'm allowed to gossip. But again, we have to be very careful that that gossip is directed for that purpose and that purpose only. We can't start writing in the newspapers. We can't start publicizing it to the world if we know that there are people who really have nothing to do with that information, but to just, relish that gossip, as so many gossip lovers like to do. So we have to be careful. But again, if it's going to stop someone from being harmed, then in that context, then it is allowed.
Is it even classified as lashon hara at that point? Doesn't sound like it.
That's right. That's a good question. Right. So if it's allowed, then it's really not lashon hara. Right.
I don't think it is.
Yeah. Exactly. That's right. But I think here we see something more profound. If I may just dig into this a little more, and that is that there are, we learn this in the soul study, but there are 3 realms in which a person lives and conveys his very being. In Kabbalah, there is the realm of thought, then there's the realm of speech, and then there's the realm of action, right? We think, then we say what we think, and then we act upon our speech. These are the 3 realms in which we live. Machshava, Dibur, and Maaseh, as they are called. Now, what's interesting is that thought is almost unimportant in Judaism, because you're not judged by your thought. If I have the most evil thought, God doesn't judge me by it. If I speak my thought that's evil, or if I act upon my thought that's evil, that's a different story. God does judge me, and I'll have to suffer the consequences. But as long as it stays up here, I'm not held accountable. Yes, for purposes of self-refinement, one should try and expel any negative thoughts. But again, I'm not held accountable based on the thoughts. So that's the least severe. But then you have speech. And speech now is more important than thought in Judaism, because what you say creates an energy, creates maybe even construction or destruction. So one has to be careful with his speech, and you are accountable for your speech. But the most severe or the most important is action. What we do has the greatest impact, much more than what we say we believe in Judaism. And therefore, we have to be extra careful with action. Now, if we look at that scale, we can also understand the logic of the answer to this question. if there is something that is going to be said in order to protect an action, again, if the action is on the highest level, then I'm allowed to say it because speech is less important than action, right? So you follow my thought process here. So I'm allowed to compromise speech for action because action is more important than speech. That's really the logic of this halakha, of this law. It's interesting because, again, I think directs us in so many other thoughts, but it directs us to the point of Judaism, and that is, as we've mentioned so many times, that you are what you do. You're also what you say, but you are what you do so much more than what you say. And if you do good and do good and do good, you become good. Yes, if you speak good and speak good, but they say talk is cheap. Still valuable, but talk is cheap. So you don't really become what you say, but you become what you do. And again, if I had to go now to the spirit of this law that allows me to transgress the prohibition of gossip or lashon hara to save someone's action, then I would say that it leads us again to this conclusion that we ought to be so much more careful about what we do, about our actions, to the point that even speech can be compromised if it is to ensure the full impact of the good action that I have to do. And it should also encourage us and propel us to do good and do good and do good and do good. I'll conclude with this, but Arnold Palmer, who's now unfortunately remembered not too much for his golfing, but for his iced tea lemonade. And but Arnold Palmer, if you remember, was an excellent golfer. And they once asked him, how come you're so good at golf? And he replied, I'm not good, I'm just lucky. Then he paused for a little bit and he said, but it's funny, because the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Oh.
And that's true. That's really a very Jewish thought. The more we do, the greater luck we have, or the luck we have from within, the more we become that goodness. And really, that's what we ought to really focus on good action after good action after good action. And that will have so much more effect than even the good speech that we have to follow and carry out each and every day.